hunting me. I must hurry. My name is Daniel. I live in London at Mayfair. What have I done? This is crazy. Don't forget. Don't forget. I must stop him. Focus. My name is... I am Daniel.
Hello everyone, my name is Joe, and apparently I bought Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Amnesia, as I'm sure you're already aware, is a horror game. It is an extremely famous horror game, an indie horror game that exploded after people started posting YouTube videos of it, started streaming it on Twitch, and started recommending it. It's on Steam, hence why I have it. I bought it during a Steam sale. And it's quite an enjoyable little game. Now, I say quite an enjoyable game for a very important reason. Now, I've only played 2 hours of this game, and that is for two reasons. The first reason is, I don't really like horror games, they're quite scary. And this is definitely not an exception. Amnesia is an extremely frightening game in parts. But we'll get to that in a minute. It's an extremely frightening game, and it sticks with you afterwards, let's just say. But that is definitely not the primary reason why I've not played this game very much. For me, Amnesia is a bit slow. And I don't mean slow as in, you know, like you move slow, or that, you know, things that happen are not at 100 miles an hour. It's just that it takes a long time to get into it. So take a game like Slender. Slender is a much simpler game. It really doesn't have any game mechanics, it's barely really a game, but the reason that I enjoyed Slender a lot more is because you get into that main body of the game a lot quicker, and it doesn't drag on sort of setting anything up. And the problem with Amnesia is, when it is setting up the story, and when it's setting up the game, and setting up the game mechanics, there is a long period of the game where you're walking around figuring not how to do things, but what you're supposed to be doing. Because it doesn't really do a very good job of explaining. It says you're supposed to just sort of look around the castle, and it kind of implies that you're looking for something, but it doesn't really give you any leads, and although the world at the beginning is quite linear, simply because not much of the castle is actually opened up, it seems as though you've got quite a large area to explore, and you have no idea where you are, you don't have any bearings, and personally I find that it's not the fact that it's disorientating, it's just the fact that it's frustrating not knowing what you're supposed to be doing, and that is, for me, one of the most annoying parts of any single player game, when the game doesn't actually explain what you're supposed to do. So if I was to put a genre on Amnesia, apart from horror of course, it would be puzzle game, because a lot of the progress through the game is made by solving simple puzzles. So it's things like physics puzzles, things like, you know, trying to find levers and pressing the right ones at the right time, and generally they're quite well done. There's some moments where you're hunting around trying to find the lever, but generally it's fairly obvious what you're supposed to do in the puzzles. Now, this still doesn't really get past the issue of not quite knowing what you're supposed to be aiming for in the grand scheme of the game, until you get a bit further into it when you reveal a bit more of the story. But it does tend, in some of the more puzzle-heavy sections of the game, it does tend to keep it going and keep the pacing quite nicely, or at least it did for me, as you tend to find yourself solving the puzzles about when you're supposed to. Now, puzzles are not the only game mechanic in this game. I mean, it isn't the most game mechanic heavy game in the world, I will admit, but there are other game mechanics than just puzzles, notably the insanity or the sanity mechanic, where if you stand around in dark places or experience terrifying events too often, then your sanity will drain, and the only way to replenish it is by standing in the light for a long time. So this keeps you from simply turning up the brightness on your monitor and going through the game. Keeps the game a bit gamey, but that is my main problem with that mechanic. It is a bit gamey in that it doesn't really do anything. I would have hoped for it to mean that things appear more often, so like the more you experience terrifying events, the more insane you become, and therefore the more you experience terrifying events. I thought that would be quite a cool game mechanic, but that doesn't seem to be in the game. Now, the story of Amnesia is generally quite interesting. It's told through audio, flashbacks, and little notes that you pick up like that. I mean, I skipped through that one quite quickly, but because there's no real cutscenes and there's no actual visual flashbacks, like you don't see anybody else, it keeps the atmosphere of the game while still managing to convey the story in quite an interesting way. As I said earlier on in the video, this game is set in a castle, and it's quite an eerie environment. They've done a very good job of setting up the castle and setting up all of the areas in the castle to be quite frightening and to be quite creepy. There's things like that strange blood thing that looks like it's from War of the Worlds. There's things like that scattered throughout the castle, which keep the monsters and the scary things that you're supposed to be running away from just close enough to home to keep the atmosphere of the game scary for most of the time that you play it. Now, I say most because I'm trying to touch on a problem that is universal throughout all horror games, and that is the fact that they have no replayability. You cannot replay a horror game. Or at least you can't replay horror games as they are now. And that is because every single time that you play that game, every single time that you go through a level, it is the same. Scripted events will never change. And horror games at the moment rely far too much on scripted events. Especially games like Amnesia and the Fear franchise were very scripted. And it's extremely frustrating. Now, I don't actually know of any games that are procedurally generated, any horror games that are sort of procedurally generated or change every time that you play it. I mean, Left 4 Dead does, but it's not a horror game. Left 4 Dead does change every time that you play it because it spawns different things in, and in Left 4 Dead 2 they added things in like the changing routes of the maps, and that's really interesting, but horror games don't seem to do it. So if you want to post in the comments below if you like horror games, any horror games that you know of that change every time you play them, please do, because I would genuinely like to play a game like that. But I've run out of time, run out of gameplay, so I hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you did, and hopefully I will see you guys next time.